Faces of Death is one of the most controversial and widely discussed titles in the history of shock cinema. A film that built its reputation not through traditional storytelling, but through the intense reactions it provoked from audiences. From the moment it first circulated, it gained notoriety for presenting itself as a raw and unfiltered exploration of mortality, blurring the line between documentary and staged reenactment. This unsettling ambiguity became the foundation of its cultural impact, as viewers were left questioning what was real and what was fabricated, turning the film into a subject of debate, fear, and morbid curiosity for decades. The concept behind Faces of Death was rooted in the idea of confronting audiences with the reality of death in a way that mainstream media typically avoided. Instead of treating death as something distant or sanitized, the film assembled a series of scenes depicting accidents, medical procedures, and violent incidents, all framed as part of a supposed documentary study on the many ways human life can end. This approach challenged conventional filmmaking norms, especially at a time when censorship and moral boundaries in cinema were more rigid. The result was a project that felt both forbidden and strangely compelling, drawing viewers who were curious to see something they believed they were never meant to witness. One of the reasons Faces of Death became so infamous was the way it was presented. The film adopted a serious, almost clinical tone, with narration that treated the footage as educational material rather than entertainment. This stylistic choice created an eerie sense of authenticity, even when many of the sequences were later revealed to be staged. The calm, matter-of-fact delivery contrasted sharply with the shocking visuals, intensifying the discomfort felt by viewers. By framing its content as a study rather than a spectacle, the film managed to slip past certain expectations, leaving audiences unsure whether they were watching a legitimate documentary or a carefully constructed illusion. The film's structure is episodic, moving from one segment to another without a traditional narrative arc. Each sequence focuses on a different aspect of death, ranging from natural causes to violent accidents and criminal acts. This fragmented format contributes to the unsettling nature of the experience because there is no clear emotional progression or resolution. Instead, the viewer is forced to confront one disturbing scenario after another, with little time to process what they have just seen. The lack of a central storyline also makes the film feel more like a compilation of forbidden material than a cohesive cinematic work, reinforcing its underground reputation. Faces of Death quickly became the subject of bans and restrictions in multiple regions, which only amplified its mystique. The more authorities attempted to suppress it, the more curious audiences became. This phenomenon created a feedback loop in which the film's notoriety fueled its popularity, transforming it into a cultural legend even among people who had never actually seen it. Stories about the film's content spread through word of mouth, often exaggerated or distorted, making it seem even more extreme than it was. This myth-making process played a major role in cementing its place in cinematic history as one of the most shocking films ever produced. The controversy surrounding Faces of Death also sparked broader conversations about ethics in filmmaking. Critics questioned whether it was appropriate to depict death in such a graphic and sensationalized manner, even if some of the footage was staged. Others argued that the film exposed society's hypocrisy, pointing out that real violence was already present in news broadcasts and other media, yet audiences were more disturbed when confronted with it in an entertainment context. This debate highlighted the complicated relationship between viewers and violent imagery, forcing people to examine why certain portrayals of death were considered acceptable while others were condemned. Another key factor in the film's enduring reputation is the way it exploited the psychological boundary between fascination and repulsion. Human beings are naturally curious about death, yet at the same time they instinctively recoil from it. Faces of Death deliberately played on this tension, presenting scenes that viewers felt compelled to watch even as they wished to look away. This emotional conflict became part of the viewing experience, making the film less about the individual scenes themselves and more about the reactions they provoked. In this sense, the true subject of the film was not death alone, but the human response to witnessing it. Over time, It became widely known that many of the most shocking sequences in Faces of Death were staged using actors and special effects. This revelation changed how the film was perceived, shifting it from being seen as a genuine documentary to being recognized as a form of shock entertainment. However, this knowledge did not entirely diminish its impact. In some ways, it made the film more intriguing, as viewers began to analyze how effectively it had manipulated their emotions and beliefs. The realization that they had been fooled into questioning the authenticity of what they saw became a lesson in the power of cinematic illusion. Faces of Death also played a significant role in shaping the evolution of exploitation cinema. Its success demonstrated that there was a market for content that pushed boundaries and challenged social taboos. This realization influenced other filmmakers to experiment with controversial subject matter, leading to the creation of films that explored violence, horror, and human suffering in increasingly graphic ways. While not all of these projects achieved the same level of notoriety, the ripple effect of Faces of Death could be seen in the broader trend of shock-oriented media that emerged in subsequent years. The film's underground distribution contributed to its mystique as well. In an era before widespread internet access, copies of Faces of Death circulated through bootlegs, private screenings, and late-night video rentals. This limited accessibility made it feel like a secret that had to be discovered rather than something openly promoted. For many viewers, the act of obtaining and watching the film became an experience in itself, surrounded by whispers and warnings about its content. This sense of exclusivity helped transform it from a simple movie into a cultural phenomenon that lived in the collective imagination. Faces of Death also raised questions about the line between documentary and fiction. By presenting stage scenes alongside real footage, the film blurred distinctions that audiences had traditionally relied upon to interpret what they were watching. This ambiguity forced viewers to confront the possibility that documentaries, which are often assumed to be truthful, can also manipulate reality through editing, narration, and selective presentation. In this way, Faces of Death functioned as an unintentional lesson in media literacy, showing how easily perception can be shaped by the way information is delivered. The film's legacy is further complicated by the way it has been referenced and parodied in popular culture. Over the years, its title and concept have been used as shorthand for extreme or shocking content, appearing in jokes, television shows, and other films. These references often exaggerate the film's notoriety, reinforcing its mythic status even among people who have never watched it. This phenomenon demonstrates how certain works of media can transcend their original context and become symbols representing broader ideas, in this case the concept of forbidden or taboo imagery. Faces of Death also stands as an early example of the moral panic that can arise when media is perceived as dangerous or corrupting. Concerns were raised about the potential psychological effects of watching such graphic material, particularly on younger audiences. Some critics feared that repeated exposure to depictions of death could desensitize viewers or normalize violence. These anxieties mirrored similar debates that had occurred around horror films, violent video games, and other controversial forms of entertainment. The film thus became part of a larger pattern in which new or extreme media formats are met with suspicion and calls for regulation. Despite the controversy, there were also viewers who defended Faces of Death as a form of social commentary. They argued that by forcing audiences to confront the reality of mortality, the film challenged the sanitized and often unrealistic portrayals of death in mainstream media. According to this perspective, the discomfort it generated was not a flaw, but a deliberate and meaningful reaction, intended to provoke reflection on the fragility of life. Whether or not this interpretation aligns with the filmmaker's intentions, it illustrates how the film has been interpreted in multiple ways depending on the viewer's personal beliefs and values. The technical aspects of Faces of Death, including its grainy footage and documentary-style editing, contributed significantly to its unsettling effect. The visual quality made the scenes appear more authentic, as if they had been captured spontaneously rather than carefully staged. This aesthetic choice was crucial in maintaining the illusion that the film was presenting genuine material. It also demonstrated how production techniques can influence audience perception, showing that realism in cinema is often a carefully constructed illusion rather than a straightforward reflection of reality. As years passed and audiences became more aware of the film's production methods, Faces of Death began to be viewed through a more analytical lens. Film scholars and critics examined it not just as a shock piece, but a